Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is disappear without a sound, no message, no warning, no closure, just silence, pure, heavy, and unforgettable. When you go silent for months, something begins to shift inside his mind. At first, he feels relief. He thinks your silence means surrender, that maybe you've moved on. But as the days turn into weeks, and the weeks fade into months, that silence begins to echo. He starts checking his phone a little more often, scrolling through old messages, reading every word with a heart that suddenly feels too heavy. The same person who once thought you talked too much now starts missing every word you used to say. Your silence becomes a mirror, and he doesn't always like what he sees. He sees the moments he took for granted, the conversations he cut short, the emotions he ignored. At first, he tries to fill the void with friends, with laughter, with distraction. But the thing about silence is, it's louder than noise. It creeps into his thoughts late at night, whispers your name in his mind, and makes him realize that your absence is not emptiness, it's power. He begins to understand that you never needed to shout to be heard. You never needed to argue to prove a point. Your silence became the message, and that message hits harder than any words ever could. It tells him that you've outgrown the need for validation, that you've chosen peace over chaos, growth over games, and healing over history. He'll replay everything, the good, the bad, the careless moments, trying to figure out when your silence began. And that's when realization strikes. It wasn't a sudden silence. It was a silence built by his own actions. Now he feels the distance, not as a punishment, but as a consequence. He starts to see that silence isn't about ignoring, it's about respecting yourself enough to walk away from what no longer values you. And maybe one day he'll reach out, not to break the silence, but to understand it. But by then, you'll have already found your peace, because silence didn't make you weaker. It made you stronger, it made you whole, it made you free. Silence is not emptiness, it's energy focused, calm, and heavy with meaning. When you stop talking, when your messages stop appearing, when your presence fades into quiet, that silence begins to speak. It says what words never could. It carries weight, it carries memory, it carries truth. In the beginning, he doesn't notice it. He assumes it's just space, that you're busy, distracted, or maybe trying to make a point. But silence, when it lasts, starts to shift the atmosphere around him. It's like the air changes suddenly. He realizes that the noise that once surrounded him isn't comforting anymore. It's empty. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting every careless moment, every half-hearted reply, every ignored emotion. It forces him to sit with his own thoughts he's been running from. And in that stillness, he begins to hear the things he never listened to before. Because silence doesn't need to explain itself. It doesn't chase, it doesn't beg, it simply is. And in that stillness, he starts to realize how loud your absence truly is. Every room feels quieter, but heavier. Every laugh feels shorter. Every moment feels like something's missing, and he can't quite describe it, but he feels it. That's what silence does. It becomes a teacher. It teaches him the difference between being heard and being understood, between attention and appreciation, between having someone around and truly valuing them. And as the days stretch longer, that silence begins to whisper louder than any argument ever could. It tells him what your words once couldn't, that you've withdrawn not out of anger, but out of peace. That you've stopped explaining because you've finally realized he wasn't listening, and that silence, that calm, unspoken distance, starts to live rent. Free in his mind. It's not revenge, it's not punishment. It's reflection, the kind that grows louder each day, the kind that doesn't fade, the kind that lingers when the lights go out and the world quiets down. Because silence, when it's real, doesn't end the story. It just begins a chapter he never thought he'd have to read alone. After the silence settles, after the noise fades, Something begins to stir inside his mind. It starts small, a memory, a single moment. Maybe it's a message you once sent that he didn't answer right away. Maybe it's the way you said it's fine, but your eyes told a different story. He starts replaying those scenes like old tapes, rewinding every word, every tone, every pause. It's strange how something that once felt so ordinary now feels so heavy. He remembers the sound of your laughter, how it used to fill the spaces between his thoughts, how it used to make even his worst days bearable. Now that laughter only lives inside his head, and it echoes louder than anything around him. He starts to wonder, when did it start slipping away? Was it the day he chose pride over apology? Was it when he stopped asking how you really felt? Or was it when he assumed you'd always stay, no matter how cold he became? The mind does cruel things in silence. It replays what it once ignored. He begins to analyze your last words, your last call, your last good, by trying to find the exact point where your tone changed, where your patience ran out, where your heart quietly decided it had enough. And the more he replays it, the more he realizes it wasn't a single moment, it was many. A pattern of small things that built up, drop by drop, until your silence became a flood he couldn't stop. He hears the words he never said out loud. The ones he kept inside, thinking there'd always be another chance. He imagines how it would have felt if he had told you what you meant before you walked away. That's the thing about silence, it creates space for reflection, but that reflection doesn't always feel peaceful. It feels like standing in front of a mirror that never blinks, one that forces him to face the truth he kept running from. He starts missing your good mornings, your check-ins, your little reminders that someone cared. He replays your voice in his mind not because he wants to remember, but because he can't forget. And every replay ends the same way, with silence, that unspoken ending, that unanswered message, that quiet ache that tells him this time you're really gone. He scrolls through old chats, screenshots, photos, searching for comfort, but finding only weight. He realizes now that your voice wasn't noise. It was balance. It was warmth. It was the one sound that made his world make sense. And now in your silence, he hears every word he never cared to listen to before. He replays it again and again and again, each time hoping for a different ending, but deep down knowing that some endings don't come with closure. Some come with silence, and that silence keeps looping in his mind, louder than guilt, sharper than regret. Because this time, it's not just quiet, it's the sound of everything he never said coming back to haunt him. There comes a moment after the noise fades, after the replays lose their meaning, when his mind stops searching for answers in the past and starts looking inward. That's when reflection begins, not confusion, not denial, but something deeper, something that stings. He starts to notice the silence isn't just around him, it's inside him. The same quiet that used to bring peace now feels heavy. It presses against his chest, reminding him that maybe the problem was never your silence. Maybe it was his inability to listen before it came. He begins to see the truth he avoided, the moments he brushed off as nothing. The way your tone changed when you started losing pieces of yourself, trying to hold him together. He remembers how your eyes used to shine when you talked, and how, near the end, that light started to fade, not because you stopped caring, but because you were slowly realizing he didn't see you the same way anymore. Now he's alone with his thoughts, and in that stillness he starts to reflect on who he was when you were there and who he became when you left. He realizes how quickly he dismissed your emotions, how easily he chose silence over effort, how confidently he assumed you'd never walk away. And now, that same silence he ignored has become the lesson he can't escape. He starts to feel the weight of everything unspoken, the apologies he never made, the appreciation he never voiced, the effort he never gave. Each thought hits harder than the last because reflection doesn't arrive with comfort. It arrives with clarity. He begins to see how your silence isn't a wall, it's a mirror. It shows him not who you are, but who he became. It strips away the excuses, the pride, the distractions until all that's left is truth. And truth, when it finally hits, doesn't knock politely. It crashes in. It exposes everything. Every moment he laughed off. Every time he thought your patience was endless. Every time he let his ego speak louder than his heart. He reflects on the kind of presence you brought, how your energy softened his chaos, how your words steadied his storm. And now, with you gone, he realizes that silence isn't the absence of noise, it's the presence of realization. He looks back and starts to understand that silence doesn't mean you stopped caring. It means you stopped trying to explain what he refused to understand. It means you chose peace not because he deserved it, but because you did. And that reflection keeps growing. It doesn't stop after one night or one memory. It lingers, it deepens. It makes him question who he is without you, what he lost, and why he didn't listen when your voice still had warmth in it. Because silence doesn't always break people immediately, sometimes it unfolds slowly. Each day, a new layer of realization. Each memory, another sting of truth. Each heartbeat whispering, this is what happens when you take someone's voice for granted, until all that's left is silence. And that reflection, it doesn't end. It keeps circling in his thoughts, growing louder in the quiet, until he begins to understand. Reflection does something strange to the heart. It makes you see what you had only when it's gone. And that's where he is now standing in the quiet aftermath of your silence, slowly realizing that what he once treated as ordinary was never ordinary at all. He starts to see the value of everything he used to overlook. The small things, the quiet gestures, the way you listened when he was lost in his own chaos, the way you cared not because you had to, but because your heart was built that way. He remembers the mornings when your messages came before his alarm. The days you tried to check in even when you were exhausted. The nights you stayed awake just to make sure he was okay. He remembers all of it now, the things he scrolled past, the calls he delayed, the effort he shrugged off. And suddenly, every ignored moment feels like a piece of gold he carelessly dropped into the sea. That's the cruel part about losing someone genuine. The value doesn't hit you all at once. It seeps in, slow and sharp, like water through cracks. He begins to understand that what he lost wasn't just a person, it was consistency, warmth, loyalty, peace. The kind of presence that made his world softer, even when life wasn't. Now, he values the silence differently. Before, it felt like distance. Now, it feels like consequence. He realizes you weren't asking for too much, you were giving more than anyone else ever would. He replays the moments when you asked for effort, when you needed him to show up, when you waited for understanding instead of excuses, and he sees now that your patience wasn't weakness. It was love disguised as endurance. And he wasted it. He starts valuing the things that once annoyed him. Your constant reminders, your honesty, your intensity. Things he used to think were too much. Now, he'd give anything to feel them again, to receive another long message, another gentle correction, another conversation that meant something. Because silence has a strange way of teaching worth. It strips away the noise of the world until all that's left is memory, and memory is cruelly clear. He sees you everywhere, in songs, in places, in words other people say. And with every reminder comes the same thought: you were irreplaceable. He starts valuing your presence not just for what it gave him, but for what it taught him. That love isn't about constant noise, it's about showing up. That patience isn't endless, it's earned. That people who give from the heart don't stay where they're unseen forever. Now, he understands why silence feels so heavy, because it carries the weight of everything he should have valued when he had the chance. And that realization doesn't fade, it stays. It lingers in the corners of his mind, in the quiet moments before sleep, in the places where your voice used to live. He starts to value the moments not because they were perfect, but because they were real. And as he finally begins to see your worth, he also begins to understand the hardest truth of all, that sometimes realizing someone's value comes too late. And that too late, it doesn't sound like a door slam or a goodbye. It sounds like silence, steady, haunting, endless, the kind that reminds him every single day what he lost. There's a point when pride can no longer protect him. It begins quietly, not with an apology, not with tears, but with that sinking feeling that maybe this time silence isn't a game. It's real. At first, he tells himself he's fine. He wears confidence like a shield, laughs louder than usual, pretends that the distance doesn't matter. But beneath the surface, his ego starts to tremble. Because deep down, he feels the shift, the balance that used to exist between you has changed. You're not reaching out. You're not chasing anymore. You've stepped away, not in anger, but in peace, and that peace burns his pride more than confrontation ever could. Ego hates silence. It feeds on reaction, on attention, on proof that it still matters. But when you stay quiet, when you stop explaining, when you stop showing up, his ego has nothing left to feed on. And slowly, it begins to starve. He starts to question his own strength. That false confidence he once carried begins to feel like a mask that's too heavy to hold. He used to think silence meant victory, now it feels like defeat. Because how can victory feel this empty? He begins to sense the hollowness behind his own words. The excuses he told himself no longer sound convincing. He replays old conversations where he tried to win arguments instead of understanding you. Moments when being right mattered more than being kind. And he realizes that every victory built on ego came at the cost of losing something far greater. Now, every ounce of pride begins to feel poisonous. Every time he told himself he didn't need you starts to sound like a lie whispered too many times to believe. He remembers your patience, how you stayed through his arrogance, through the times he pushed you away just to see if you'd return. And now, in your silence, he finally sees how much of his ego was built on the comfort of your forgiveness. The cracks begin to show not in his face, but in his heart. He starts to feel the difference between strength and stubbornness, between control and connection, between having the upper hand and having peace. He thought silence would make him untouchable. Instead, it made him vulnerable, because the louder he pretends to not care, the more the quiet around him exposes the truth. He does. And slowly his ego begins to crumble, not in one dramatic moment, but piece by piece. Every ignored message, every lost memory, every realization that you're no longer waiting on the other side of pride. He tries to rebuild it, tries to convince himself that he's still in control, but it doesn't feel the same anymore. Because once ego breaks under the weight of genuine loss, it never fits back together the same way. It softens him unwillingly, painfully, completely. Now he walks through days that look normal, but nothing feels whole. The silence that once fed his pride now echoes through his mind, whispering reminders of the one person who saw past his defenses and walked away anyway. And in that quiet, he feels something unfamiliar: humility. The kind that doesn't beg for attention, but aches for understanding. The kind that doesn't scream, "Come back," but silently admits, "I was wrong." His walls begin to fall, slowly, silently, one thought at a time. And underneath all that armor, beneath every layer of pride, he finds something he hasn't faced in a long time himself. And that realization, that soft collapse of everything he built to look strong, doesn't end. It keeps breaking, reshaping, humbling until the silence becomes heavier than the ego he once worshipped. When the noise inside him finally quiets when his ego has cracked, and the silence has settled into his bones, something begins to shift. Not quickly, not all at once, but slowly, quietly, the fog starts to lift, and through it, he starts to see you not the way he saw you before, but as you truly were. He begins to notice the details his pride once blurred. How your presence had its own rhythm, calm, steady, grounding. How you never demanded attention, yet somehow you became the center of everything. He remembers how you really listened when no one else did. How you saw through his bravado, through the parts he tried to hide, and met him where he was, not where he pretended to be. Now he sees it all, the kindness that wasn't weakness, the softness that wasn't naivety, the patience that wasn't obligation, it was love, pure and uncalculated. He starts to realize that worth isn't measured in noise or attention, it's measured in peace. And you brought peace even when he brought storms. You were the calm he mistook for routine, the loyalty he confused with predictability, the comfort he took for granted because he thought it would never leave. But now that silence stands between you, he finally understands what you gave him, not just time, but presence. Not just care, but consistency. Not just affection, but understanding, the kind that's rare, the kind people spend a lifetime searching for. And as the days pass, he starts to see that your worth wasn't something that faded when you left, it grew. Every time he reaches for a distraction, it doesn't fill the space you once occupied. Every voice sounds hollow. Every conversation feels short-lived. Because when someone has known a soul like yours, everything after feels smaller, lighter, less real. He sees now that your silence isn't emptiness, it's the mark of boundaries, of growth, of someone who finally chose themselves after choosing others for too long. And that realization hits differently. Because he starts to understand that your worth was never about what you did for him, it was about who you were, even when he didn't see it. He remembers how you showed up when he didn't ask, how you stayed when things got heavy, how you made him feel seen without him having to say a word. And now, when he looks back, he realizes no one else ever did that. No one else ever will, not in that way. He begins to feel it in the smallest moments, in the mornings when the quiet feels too still, in the nights when the world is asleep, and his mind drifts back to what once felt so certain. He starts to feel your absence not as silence but as value, the kind that can't be replaced, can't be replicated, can't be forgotten. And it dawns on him your worth was never tied to his recognition. It was always there, glowing quietly beneath his indifference, waiting for him to notice. And now that he finally sees it, he realizes how blind he truly was. He looks at where you used to stand in his life, the way you made even ordinary days feel alive, the way you understood without explanations, the way your presence made him better without ever trying, and he knows now. He mistook something rare for something permanent. And that realization doesn't fade when he's busy. It doesn't fade when he smiles for photos or laughs with friends. Because your worth wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. It left an imprint. A quiet reminder that not everyone who walks away leaves a void, some leave a lesson, a silence that teaches. And now he carries that silence with him, not as emptiness, but as proof. Proof that he once had something genuine, something irreplaceable, something he only learned to value after it was no longer his to keep, and that understanding doesn't bring peace. It brings ache, a slow, unending ache that sits behind every thought, whispering the same truth over and over again. You see her worth now, but she saw yours long before you ever earned it. And in that whisper, his realization doesn't end, it deepens, spreading through him like a quiet storm, reminding him that some silences don't fade with time. They grow louder until worth becomes the only sound left in his mind. It happens gradually. Not in one dramatic silence, not in a single lonely night, but in the slow unraveling of sound around him. The world keeps moving, voices still echo, Laughter still fills the air, but it all starts to sound different. Duller, distant, like someone turned the volume down on life itself. The people around him still talk, they joke, they share stories, they fill the room with noise, but somewhere between the words, he feels the hollow spaces. Because nothing they say reaches him the way your voice did. Nothing touches the same place in his mind that your presence once did. Everything feels loud but empty. He sits among crowds, but his thoughts wander. He hears his friends laugh, but it feels like background noise. Even music, the songs he once loved, now carry your shadow. Every lyric sounds heavier, every melody a reminder not of what he lost, but of what he let slip away. He begins to realize that silence isn't always the absence of sound. Sometimes it's when the noise no longer means anything, when you've heard everything but felt nothing. And that's where he finds himself now, surrounded by noise, yet haunted by quiet. Because your silence didn't just remove your words, it removed meaning. The world still hums around him, but he's tuned into a different frequency, one where every sound seems to remind him of what's missing. He goes about his days, the same routines, the same faces, but everything feels muted. Conversations that used to excite him now tire him. Moments that used to matter now feel like fillers. It's as if your absence absorbed all the color from his world, leaving behind shades of gray. And deep down, he understands something he never noticed before. It wasn't the world that got quieter, it was him. Because when someone like you goes silent, it's not just their voice that fades, it's their energy. Their presence, their calm. You were the quiet harmony in all his chaos, and now, without it, every sound feels off-beat. He tries to drown it out with music, with laughter, with distractions, but the silence finds him anyway. Late at night, early in the morning, in between moments of noise, it slips through the cracks and sits beside him like a shadow. And no matter how loud he tries to be, that silence always wins. He starts noticing things differently now. The way the clock ticks too loudly. The way the city hums but doesn't comfort him. The way even the wind sounds like it's carrying whispers he can't quite name. And in that fading noise, he starts to hear something else, his own thoughts. The ones he buried when you were still speaking to him. The ones he ignored because your voice was always there to guide him back. Now there's nothing to cover them. Just silence, soft but heavy, peaceful but suffocating. And in that stillness, he realizes how much noise he used to create to avoid facing what was real. Your presence had been his calm, his grounding force, the steady pulse beneath the chaos. Now that it's gone, every sound around him feels meaningless. He begins to crave the kind of quiet you brought, the one that didn't feel empty, but full. The kind of silence that existed between two people who didn't need to fill every moment with words. He misses the peace in your pauses, the warmth in your stillness, the comfort of knowing that silence with you never felt lonely. But now that same silence feels endless, and the world around him, no matter how loud, can't drown it out. The laughter fades quicker, the nights stretch longer, and the quiet between every sound feels like a reminder that peace left with you. He walks through life now with noise all around him, but the only thing he truly hears is the silence you left behind, the kind that doesn't echo, it lingers. Softly, endlessly, until even his heartbeat starts to sound like it's whispering your absence. And in that fading noise, he begins to understand that the world didn't go quiet. He did, because once you've known someone whose presence sounded like peace, every other sound in the world just feels like a distraction from the silence that follows. There comes a point when the quiet turns into clarity. When the noise has faded, the crowd has thinned, and the distractions have lost their shine. That's when truth begins to reveal itself, not with thunder, not with sudden awakening. It comes softly, in moments of stillness, when he's left alone with nothing but memory and time. He starts to look around and realizes how temporary most people are. The ones who laughed the loudest have gone quiet. The ones who stood close in his brightness disappeared when the lights dimmed. And in the emptiness of that discovery, he begins to understand something he never did before, that not everyone who surrounds you truly stands with you. He remembers the way you stayed, not just in easy times, but in the messy ones. The way you listened when no one else had patience. The way you noticed the smallest changes in his tone, the slightest drop in his energy. You were the one who stayed when things weren't fun, when life wasn't filtered, when the world wasn't clapping. And that's when it hits him you mattered in ways no one else ever did. He starts to see it clearly now, how you moved quietly but with depth. You never needed to prove your loyalty. It was written in the way you showed up. You never needed to announce your care. It lived in the way you understood what he couldn't say. And now that you're gone, he can see the difference between those who came for moments and the one who came with meaning. He looks at his circle smaller now, thinner, quieter. And for the first time, he notices how crowded he once was with people who filled his time but never touched his soul. They were loud, they were fun, they were present until they weren't. But you were consistent, and it's that consistency he can't forget. That soft, steady energy that never demanded recognition, never asked to be noticed, yet always made him feel seen. Now, as he stands surrounded by familiar faces that suddenly feel like strangers, he begins to miss the authenticity that once filled his world when you were in it. Because what he lost wasn't just a person, it was truth. And truth, once gone, leaves an ache that noise can't drown. He starts to learn the value of presence, not the kind that fills space, but the kind that brings peace. He realizes how rare it is to find someone who listens to understand instead of to reply, who stays out of love instead of convenience, who gives without keeping score. You were that person, and he never saw it clearly until the silence forced him to look. He begins to reflect on how many people he called friends, how many names filled his phone, how many faces filled his days, yet none of them carried the weight of your quiet understanding. They came when it was easy, disappeared when it wasn't, but you. You stayed through the unspoken, through the in-between, through the chaos he created and the calm you kept. Now, when he scrolls through old photos, the smiles look different. He sees moments filled with laughter that somehow feel hollow now. Because the truth is, some people are chapters, but you were a story, and the story doesn't fade just because the pages stop turning. He starts to understand the difference between attachment and connection. Attachment keeps people close out of habit. Connection keeps them close out of soul. You were never a habit, you were a heartbeat, a quiet rhythm that kept everything in balance without him even realizing it. And in that realization, he feels the weight of the truth settling in. He confused the loud for the loyal, the available for the genuine, the convenient for the constant. Now, silence has stripped away all illusions, and what's left is raw, undeniable clarity. He knows now who mattered, not the ones who entertained him, not the ones who echoed his pride, but the one who challenged his emptiness with quiet care, the one who stood still when everything else moved. And that knowledge doesn't soothe him, it stings, because learning who truly mattered always comes with the ache of knowing he let them go. It's the kind of understanding that doesn't fade. It stays like a soft hum in the background of his days, a reminder that not everyone who leaves takes value with them. Some leave meaning, and that meaning follows him everywhere he goes. Now he watches the world around him keep spinning, faces changing, voices blending, time passing, but beneath it all, there's a quiet thread running through his thoughts, pulling him back to the same truth over and over again. That in the end, only a few people ever really matter, and he already lost the one who mattered most. And that realization doesn't bring peace, it brings perspective, the kind that whispers when the room is still, that lingers when the laughter fades, that reminds him in the softest voice possible that what he's looking for out there, he already had, and he let it slip away into silence. And in that awareness, the lesson keeps unfolding, never ending, never softening, just echoing quietly in the spaces where your presence used to be. There's a shift that happens when the silence stops hurting and starts healing. At first, the quiet felt heavy, like a punishment, like a void too deep to climb out of. But then, slowly, almost quietly, something changes. You start to feel the weight of peace settling in, and you realize it isn't emptiness anymore, it's freedom. You begin to see that silence was never a prison, it was a mirror, showing you everything you forgot about yourself. Because in the noise, you were always reacting, trying to explain, to fix, to prove, to be understood. But when you went silent, you stopped chasing. You stopped explaining yourself to people who were never really listening. And that's where your power started to return, not in the noise, but in the stillness. You learn that not responding doesn't mean you don't care, it means you value your peace more than their chaos. You realize that silence isn't weakness, it's control. It's the quiet confidence of someone who has finally learned that not everything deserves a response, not every wound deserves to be reopened, not every person deserves the access they once had. And as the days stretch on, you begin to move differently. There's something sacred in your calm now, a kind of strength that doesn't need to shout, doesn't need to prove itself to anyone. You walk through the world with quiet assurance, like someone who knows exactly what they bring and finally knows who is worthy of receiving it. People notice the change but can't quite name it. They sense the shift in your energy. You're no longer waiting for closure, no longer begging for understanding, no longer explaining the fire that burns inside you. You simply stand in it, steady, composed, unshaken. Because that's the thing about silence. It strips away the illusions, and what's left behind is real, your self-respect, your clarity, your boundaries. You start to realize that the person you once waited on, the one who once made you question your worth, was never your source of peace. You were always the calm in your own storm. You just forgot, because you handed your power away to someone who never knew what to do with it. Now every moment you spend in quiet is no longer loneliness, it's alignment. You're reconnecting with parts of yourself that you abandoned while trying to be understood. You start writing again, dreaming again, breathing again. You begin to look at your own reflection and see not what you lost, but what you found: your strength, your voice, your balance. And it's beautiful, not loud, not dramatic, just quietly powerful. The kind of beauty that doesn't demand attention but naturally draws it. Because nothing is more magnetic than peace that's earned, not given. You stop explaining why you left, why you distanced yourself, why you went silent for months. You no longer feel the need to defend your healing, because real healing doesn't need to be justified. It simply shows in the way you no longer react to what once shattered you. There's a moment, it could be while you're walking alone, or maybe just sitting by a window, watching the light spill across your floor, when it hits you that you've come full circle. You're not who you were when you first fell silent. You're not the person who needed to be heard to feel valid. You've become someone who understands the strength in being misunderstood. Someone who knows that peace isn't found in noise, it's protected in quiet. And from that quiet, something new starts to rise. Not revenge, not regret, but renewal. You find yourself no longer carrying the weight of proving your worth. You no longer need anyone's validation to know that you've grown. You just know. You feel it in the way your heart no longer races at the sound of old names, in the way your mind no longer replays old conversations, in the way your silence no longer aches, it empowers. And that power doesn't shout. It moves softly, gracefully, like a calm tide that no longer fears the storm. It's in the way you speak less but mean more, in the way you choose peace over participation. In the way you smile, knowing that what left wasn't loss, it was release. People might still wonder what happened in your silence, what changed, what broke, what healed, but you don't owe them the answer. Because your silence told the whole story. Every unspoken word became a boundary. Every pause became protection. Every moment of quiet became a declaration. You don't need to be understood to be at peace. And so you keep moving, not backwards, not forwards, but deeper into yourself, into growth, into that sacred calm that can't be taken, only cultivated. And in that depth, you discover the kind of power that doesn't fade. The kind that doesn't depend on who stays or who leaves. The kind that whispers you've returned to yourself. And maybe that's the real victory, not that he finally noticed, but that you finally did. You noticed your own strength, your own light, your own peace, and you chose it fully, without needing anyone else to validate it. And the silence that once felt like absence has now become your armor, soft, steady, unbreakable, and it keeps growing inside you, endlessly, never ending, just flowing, stronger with every quiet breath you take. There's a moment when silence stops being just a pause and becomes transformation. It's not just the absence of sound anymore, it's the presence of clarity. It's that quiet force that rearranges everything without saying a word, because silence doesn't just sit still. It works, it heals. It reveals, and when it's been there long enough, nothing and no one remains the same. He changes, you change. The space between you begins to breathe differently. What once felt loud with noise and confusion now feels sacred with truth. Silence doesn't destroy, it refines. It burns away illusions, false attachments, half-hearted emotions, leaving behind only what's real. At first it feels like distance, like something has ended. But as time stretches, that stillness starts to show its purpose. It's not an ending, it's an unveiling. You begin to see things as they are, not as you hoped they would be. You begin to see yourself not through the eyes of someone else, but through the quiet honesty of your own reflection. He starts to see it too. In the quiet, he feels the ripple of every word left unsaid, every presence he took for granted. He begins to notice how the world sounds different without your voice in it, how the silence doesn't just echo around him, it echoes within him. Every thought he once brushed aside now grows louder in the absence of your reassurance. Every truth he avoided now finds its way to the surface, because silence doesn't just hold space, it forces reflection. It turns time into a mirror, showing both of you what was hidden behind noise. It's in that space where you realize who was holding peace and who was holding pain, who was giving love and who was taking it. Who was trying to build something real, and who was just passing time. The silence changes everything, not by force, but by truth. It doesn't scream, it doesn't demand. It just waits patiently, gracefully, until what's real can no longer be denied. You begin to move differently now. The world feels softer, slower, more intentional. You notice how you breathe easier, how your thoughts feel lighter, how your energy no longer leaks into places that never deserved it. And in that calm, you realize that silence didn't just separate you from someone, it reconnected you to yourself. You start to see how noise once controlled you, how you used words to fill spaces that didn't need to be filled, how you stayed in conversations just to avoid endings, how you explained yourself to people who had already decided not to understand. Now you don't. Now you let silence speak for you, and somehow it says everything better than words ever did. The silence becomes your boundary, your language, your protection. It's not cold, it's sacred. It keeps what's not meant for you away, and draws what's aligned with your peace closer. It's like the universe rearranges itself to match the calm you've chosen. You no longer chase, you attract. You no longer explain. You embody, you no longer seek closure. You are the closure, and while he's still trying to decode the quiet, trying to understand what changed, what shifted, what went wrong, you're already somewhere else entirely. Not physically, but emotionally, you've stepped into a different frequency, one where peace feels louder than attention, where understanding yourself feels better than being understood by anyone else. The silence changes how you love too. You no longer give just to feel needed. You give when it feels natural, when it flows, when it's mutual. You no longer confuse availability with affection. You've learned that real connection doesn't need constant noise. It survives in the spaces between words, in the pauses, in the mutual understanding that doesn't need to be said out loud. And while the world keeps spinning loud, distracted, endless, you've learned to move differently within it. You speak when you mean it. You walk away when it's heavy. You protect your peace like it's sacred because now you know it is. He might still be wondering, still replaying, still trying to make sense of how silence became louder than anything you ever said. But you no longer wait for him to understand. Because silence already told the story, his, yours, and everything in between. It told it perfectly, without sound. And maybe that's what makes it so powerful. It doesn't announce change. It becomes it, slowly, deeply, irreversibly. Now silence isn't loneliness, it's evolution. It's the pause that grows you, the space that frees you, the quiet that reminds you of who you were before the noise. You start to see life differently now. You no longer crave constant connection. You crave meaning. You no longer rush to reply. You wait to feel. You no longer explain your peace. You protect it. And in that shift, everything, absolutely everything changes. The silence has rewritten your language. You speak less, but every word carries purpose. You love slower but deeper. You move quieter but stronger. You've become the calm in your own chaos, the stillness in your own storm. And while he's still lost somewhere between confusion and realization, you've already found what the silence was trying to show you all along, that sometimes distance isn't disconnection, it's direction. It's where you find your way back to yourself. And in that quiet awakening, you finally understand the silence didn't just change him or you. It changed everything. It keeps changing still, like an endless echo, soft but powerful, carrying truth through every quiet heartbeat, through every pause that follows, through every moment that no longer needs words. And maybe it never really ends because the silence, once awakened, never leaves. It just keeps moving with you, shaping you, protecting you, reminding you that peace, real peace, isn't found in noise. It's found in never needing to make yourself heard again. And in the end, it's not the silence that breaks him, it's what the silence revealed. He learns that peace is louder than noise, that distance doesn't always mean absence. Sometimes it means strength. He learns that not every goodbye is spoken, and not every ending needs words. You didn't leave to hurt him. You left to hear yourself again, and in doing so, you became something he never expected: unreachable, untouchable, unforgettable. Because silence, it changes everything. It teaches, it humbles, it rebuilds. It reminds you that you never needed validation. You only needed space, space to breathe, space to heal, space to remember your own power. And as he sits there, replaying every unspoken word, you're no longer the one waiting to be understood. You've become the one who understands. You understand that silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom, it's growth, it's peace, and maybe that's the most beautiful ending of all, that in going silent, you finally found your voice. And this time, you'll never need to raise it again.